Thank you.
Mr. Natoli.
Yeah, and just one more general question, and this goes back to something we took up earlier in the year, and that was the cost analysis proposed regulations. What happened to that? And you did some follow-up clarifying information on a subsequent hearing. So what happened to that document, and how does it impact anything we do or don't do what's before us today?
Well, one thing it's done is it's helped us focus our attention on aspects of the regulations that might be driving costs. And so we'll get later into revisions we recommend in the policy about studying the feasibility of setting back levies that were in large part driven by stakeholders' comments in response to the assessment of the cost of complying with that policy. Other observations that people made about that portion of the regulatory package will be responded to in the final regulatory package we present you in May. So in some cases, people were alarmed by costs, and we've gone back and looked at it and thought, oh, we really overestimated costs because there'll be elements of this that are less expensive to comply with than we thought. So they've gathered more information on things. In some places, there'll probably be other adjustments that are made in that.
So if I understand you correctly, Dan, you will be bringing back in May a revised report of what was given out to us in draft, I guess it was last fall, like early winter, and then we had some more conversations, and that gets attached to what we didn't pass on that as well, or does it just serve as information, or does it goes as a full submittal to the OAL?
I think I'd defer to our counsel on what the package is, or maybe Steve Hatchett is here, could fill it in from our consultant with CH2M Hill. Steve's been our technical expert on the rulemaking process, and he can probably explain better what goes into the final package.
Yes. Good afternoon. So your question about the cost analysis. So we did get a number of comments regarding that, and as Dan said, all comments received on all portions of the regulatory package that was issued back in November will have a response as part of the final statement of reasons, including comments on the cost analysis. As Dan said, we're currently making some revisions to that cost analysis, and some of those revisions will be contingent on what the council directs staff to do today regarding some of the policies. So we have not completed those revisions, pending what your decision today is. And then that revised cost analysis will be reposted on the website for information as the public is re-reviewing during the 15-day comment period, and then that will become part of the the record, the regulatory package that you will be voting on in May.
So it's part of the submittal then, Steve?
That's right.
We take an action on it, it gets our blessing or not, but assuming it does, then that's we say we agree with what's in there, I guess, at the end of the day, right?
I don't know whether you would need to agree with 100% of the information. You would probably. I mean, I'm going to look at attorneys that as to what level of agreement. But I think what you would agree to is that it provides a reasonable set of information on which you can base your decision.
So you're going to be adopting the regulations, basically,
okay.
And then
so
the surrounding documents.
You're talking about at what date, Mr. Stevens?
That'll be in May when you adopt your regulations. But I think Steve's point is, if there are revisions that he's making to the document that was originally floated, that too will become part of the 15-day review period, or at least go out at the same time. Is that right?
Will be available for people to look at as they're reviewing the revised package.
So the public can look at the revised regulations as well as...
Just one follow-on question, though. And if after you've gone through and you make some revisions, but somebody has a real strong contest of either statements and or assumptions that are made in there, they certainly can comment on it, then what action do we have to take then to...
Right.
Or
well, I mean, that's a good question. You're under a duty to take into consideration all the comments that you receive before you vote on the regulations. So once we get final direction here coming out of this meeting, we float the entire modified package for 15 days. we'll come back to you then in May with our analysis of those comments and whether or not we suggest potentially there could be a suggestion for further revision, but who knows? At this point, I think our view, at least taking a look at the comments that we've seen to date, and there are a lot of them, we've seen most of these comments before. So I think that we can safely say, although the process is not yet over and you're not supposed to predetermine your vote ahead of time, we can safely say that we are now in the period of refinement of the ultimate product.
Leading, we hope, to a period of repose after May. Is that correct?
I don't know about that.
We'll start our hearings on the BDCP, I think. And I don't think that'll be repose.
There is no repose in the water world of California. Okay. Other questions? All right. Mr. Ray, let's start off with number one, GP1, page 1 at the top. Give us a summary, and we'll go from there.
Okay, I think, and let's just try this as an example. We'll see how much information you want from us, because I don't want to spend time just repeating text that's in the spreadsheet and information you've heard before. So I think I'd like to remind you that GP1 is the policy and the related regulation, be number 5002, that describes how agencies that are approving actions that are covered by the Delta Plan, that are covered by the consistency process, how they certify that their actions are consistent with the Delta Plan. We got 41 comments on this regulation from 16 different stakeholder groups across a wide variety of points of view. In general, the revisions we've proposed are designed to respond to comments that suggested elements of it were confusing and we could make it a little clearer. And really the revisions you see on page 1 respond to those sorts of concerns. They're mostly technical revisions that are designed to clarify how the policy would be applied by an agency certifying an action. Unless there's questions about those, I'd move on.
I think what you want to do is get to the proposals you're making to us of language we've already seen.
Yeah.
And explain why you did it, what was the motivation. Let us ask some questions about that.
Okay, what I would say then is on the revisions we're proposing to the portions of that regulation that appear on page 1, Part A.
Oh, yeah, members, can I just make one note? I asked yesterday or the day before what the difference in colors meant in this, and they said, don't pay attention to it. They're all red line regardless of color. So I think it just had to do with date and time of proposed change and modification. So if you see colors that are in purple and colors that are in red, they're to achieve the same purpose.
That's correct.
Okay.
So the revisions of Parts A and B of that policy that you see on page 1, we see as merely technical revisions that clarify the requirements that applicants would need to go through, and they don't make any substantive change in the policy. If there are questions about those revisions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay, a good way to look at this is on the right-hand side, nature of change in staff rationale. If you see a bullet point, there is a change that the staff is proposing, and that's a good way to go through the chart, I thought.
On page 2, there is an important change.
Okay, members, page 2 at the top.
And this responds to comments from the Department of Fish and Game, but also addresses concerns that several other local governments, particularly in Contra Costa and San Joaquin County, have. And this was we had forgotten to include in this regulation a provision that was in the narrative of the Delta Plan to address how habitat conservation plans or natural community conservation plans that had previously been developed, approved by the Department of Fish and Game before the adoption of the Delta Plan, how those would be addressed. There's 2 of those. One's in Contra Costa County and one's in San Joaquin County. And, of course, the basic requirement that people have in terms of ecosystem restoration is they have to certify, among other things, that the restoration actions are consistent with under ERP 2, I I think it is, they have to certify that the restoration actions they're doing are consistent with the Department of Fish and Wildlife's conservation strategy for the Delta. And these two plans, the two that were approved before the effective date of the Delta plan, were actually developed before the Department of Fish and Wildlife had developed that overall conservation strategy. And there are minor conflicts between those previously approved plans and Department of Fish and Wildlife's overall strategy. And yet the Department of Fish and Wildlife has given them a 50-year permit to implement those plans. So we don't want to be in a position, and the Department of Fish and Wildlife doesn't want to be in a position, and the affected local governments don't want to be in a position of having to go back and redo those plans and get that whole approval, go through that whole approval process again to address these relatively modest inconsistencies. We'd always agreed, after Fish and Game brought the issue to our attention, that we would consider those projects as consistent with these policies. And so what we're suggesting in that this edition is that conservation measures that would be implemented pursuant to a natural community conservation plan or a habitat conservation plan that was developed by a local government and approved by Fish and Wildlife before the effective date of the plan would be presumed consistent with Section 5005 to 5009. That's the ecosystem restoration chapter regulations of this rulemaking package.
Question, Mr. Natoli? No? Okay. Ms. Gray?
Are you getting input from each item?
Yeah, I mean, as questions occur to you on this, I'd suggest you ask them now as we go through each of these. And then after we get through asking questions, we'll ask for public comments. Then we'll circle back again on that item to see what the council wants to do.
Yeah, I would suggest we take testimony at the conclusion of our, walking through each particular regulation rather than each subsection. So,
Sure.
First, let me thank staff and for continuing to really put in a lot of work, your staff and so forth, and the consultants and the stakeholders. I mean, this continues to be a partnership process. That's the way I look at it. So I do want to thank you for that. Just have some questions regarding the first policy that you're looking at. I obviously you've done a real good job of clearing up some issues, and what I've heard is that it's good language that's more clarity to it and so forth. But the areas that you did not address in terms of potential changes, in particular the fourth bullet down that says stakeholders question the authority of the council to prevent implementation of a covered action if an appeal of the covered action certification of consistency is upheld by the council. Where would you answer that, or why was that not answered?
well, again, that's an issue that's been discussed many times before the council. I think, but Mr. Stevens provide an response in terms of where that authority comes from. But we'll be responding to that in the final rulemaking package. Then we'll have to lay out a response to every individual comment. But Chris could explain why we feel that we've got that authority.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, James.
Yeah. That's exactly it. You will see a more detailed response. That issue is another one that's fundamental to the authority question, and
right.
we have and dealt with it. I think we've mentioned it in public session before, but you will see a more fleshed out response.
Yeah, you find that in most of these questions,
Yes.
question our authority.
Yes.
Okay, but I did want to bring that forward.
Absolutely.
With this one. Thank you.
Before we,
I'm sorry?
I get one. You want to
it was
deal
just
with the detail about this item C about these previously approved habitat conservation
That's right.
plans?
It was on the language for C, and it's kind of a technical legal drafting change, editorial change that I was hoping that the council would agree to, where we say after bullet C2, we say is presumed to be consistent. Talking amongst ourselves, going into this meeting, it turns out that using the word presumed by itself has various legal meanings. We think that to be true to the arrangement or agreement or discussions that we've had all along with our partner agency at Department of Fish and Wildlife about these particular NCCPs, that it would be probably more accurate to say, instead of is presumed to be, we say, is deemed to be consistent. So it's basically a conclusive, I'm sorry.
Is deemed to
is-
be consistent
is deemed
instead of
to be
presumed to be.
consistent. If that's okay, the staff would make that change then, but it's up to you.
Okay. All right, other questions of our staff at this time?
I
Okay,
have one more thing then to be to discuss the proposed deletion of item 5. This is the current, item 5, which we're recommending deletion, was the current version of a element of this policy we discussed many times, and you probably recall some of these conversations. Some folks on the council have felt strongly that if you're going to carry out a covered action in the Delta, you've got to show that you're consistent with all the laws that would apply to that action. Why should projects that are inconsistent with state or federal law be consistent with the Delta plan? We've struggled with this, as various folks have pointed out, the difficulty of those who are approving projects to understand every state or federal law that might apply to it. If they're approving a liquor store, do they have to understand not just the zoning code, but the alcohol and beverage code? All the other various relationships that might be applied. And so at the final staff draft of the Delta plan, the council narrowed that back considerably so that agencies only needed to show that they were complying with the laws that were pertain to the project and that were applicable to water resources or biological resources or flood risks or land use planning. We've still received quite a bit of criticism about this, agencies who feel it's very burdensome, that question their expertise to make these sorts of conclusions. We've heard that concern from both local agencies as well as state agencies. And so our suggestion, in part because there are other agencies that will be looking to see if these folks are consistent with the other laws that apply at the time they get there for their permits, our suggestion is that this language could be removed.
yes.